Right, recording. I'll pause it. Remind me to turn it on when you. Thank you very much. So tonight I have the great privilege to introduce from the Centre for Fortean Zoology and from the south of England the excellent Richard Freeman, always entertaining. Tonight he'll be talking on the giant anaconda and other mega-serpents. And hopefully these slides are in the right order. Okay. So, when you're ready, Richard?
The biggest of all snakes are constricting snakes. They kill by suffocating with the muscular power of their coils rather than with venom, like smaller snakes. Now, the Victorian zoologist Charles Gould, in his magnum opus Mythical Monsters, tells us of his belief that constricting snakes once grew far beyond their modern dimensions. I fancy that at the present day, the numbers, magnitude, and terrifying nature of serpents but feebly represents the power which they asserted in the earlier days of man's existence, or the terror which they then It's in South America that most numerous reports of outsized ophidians, and this is unsurprising as the Neotropics is the lair of the giant snake El Supremo, the green anaconda. In terms of bulk, it's by far the largest snake in the world, its girth being far bigger than the largest python. The largest known specimen that was accepted by science that was measured was 29 feet long. So now which photograph are we on at the moment? There we are. Yes. Yeah, that's the giant anaconda, or the green anaconda. Can we have the next photograph, please? Thank you. That is an average size one there. You can see how big and bulky it is compared with that woman. That is just an average individual. Now, 29 feet is what is accepted as the record, but ever since the white man had first ventured tentatively into the green hell, he's brought back tales that are the very stuff of nightmares, of snakes whose size defy belief. Can we have the next slide, please? The earliest man to return with such bone-chilling yarns was one Charles Waterton, 1782 to 1865, better known as Squire Waterton, a great British eccentric and adventurer. He was a Yorkshireman from a wealthy Roman Catholic family, and he had all sorts of weird little foibles, like he insisted on sleeping on bare boards with a block of wood as his pillow. And almost unique at his age, he was a teetotaler and violently opposed to hunting for sport. He was a passionate naturalist and a collector of animals. And with true intrepid Yorkshire spirit, he made 4 expeditions into South America between 1812 and 1824, traveling in Brazil, Venezuela, and Guyana. And one of the things he did was expose his skin in the jungle at night, hoping to be bitten by a vampire bat. And he was most disappointed when he wasn't, and one of his companions was, and that his companion ran off and hid in the little. Waterson's books are full of such shenanigans. It was obvious he enjoyed himself immensely, and he lived to the ripe old age of 83, which is a miracle when you read about the risks he took. Of the anaconda, he writes, a camudi snake, as it is called in British Guiana, has been killed from 30 to 40 feet long. Though not venomous, his size renders him destructive of the passing animal. The Spaniards positively affirm that he grows to a length of 70 or 80 feet, and that he will destroy the strongest and largest bull. His name seems to confirm this. There he is called Manatoro, which means literally bull killer. Thus he must be ranked among the deadly snakes, for it comes to the same thing in the end, whether the victim dies from poison of the fangs, which corrupts the blood and makes it stink horribly, or whether the body is crushed to a mummy and swallowed by this hideous beast. And Can we have the next slide, please? Now you might recognise this chap. He's Percy Fawcett, and Percy Fawcett. He's probably the most. His account is probably the most famous of all the accounts of giant anacondas. In 1909, war was on the verge of exploding in South America. A rubber rush to rival the gold rush of the Old West was happening, and a dispute was occurring in the Rio Abuna rubber plantations on the western borders of Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. They all met at this point, and a bitter wrangle between the three countries over valuable resources was growing to dangerous levels. And the Royal Geographic Society sent a mediator to diffuse this situation, Major Percy Fawcett, a 39-year-old artillery officer who made the first intensive study of the area. And it was whilst he was engaged in this task, he initially heard of giant snakes. The manager of a remote hamlet called Yongoras told him that a 58-foot anaconda in the lower Amazon had been sighted. Fawcett disregarded the story at first, but subsequently claimed to have shot an even bigger specimen. And he was on the Rio Abuna upstream from its junction with the Rio Rapero, where he claims to have shot with a .44 soft-nosed bullet a huge anaconda that was 65 feet long, and it thrashed around violently in the water, and the people, the natives who were with us, were too frightened to go near it until it finally succumbed and died. Could you put the next slide up, please? That's a representation of it. Now, his account has been called into question, and personally, I don't believe this account. He says that the snake, for its massive size, was only 12 inches or a foot in diameter. Now, an anaconda is a very bulky snake, and a 15-foot specimen would be bigger in width than a foot. So a 65-foot specimen, they would be at least a meter across, probably considerably more. The actual skeleton inside, without the muscle or the flesh, would be much bigger than a foot across. So I'm inclined to reject Fawcett's story as a traveller's tale. He also said that the anaconda has a stupefying breath, that it breathes out this sort of stupefying breath that makes its victims fall into a stupor, which is absolute nonsense. No snake does that. And he also said that they were, in his account, that they were in danger from the snake's mate, and that the snake's mate might attack them for shooting its mate, which is absolute nonsense. That snakes don't mate for life. They mate and then go their separate ways. And anacondas mate in huge mating balls, which consist of dozens of males competing to mate with one of the females. The females are considerably larger than the males, so you get a great ball of males trying to mate with one female. So I'm inclined to reject his story as nothing more than a traveller's tale. But other stories are not so easily rejected. A missionary, Father Devanaza, wrote in the 19th century of an anaconda in another quite fatuous manner. The sight of this monster confounds, intimidates, and infuses respect into the heart of the boldest man. He never seeks or follows his victim when he feeds, but so great is the force of his inspiration that he draws in with his breath whatever quadruped or bird may pass him within 50 yards of distance according to its size. That which I killed from my canoe on the Pescata with 5 shots from my fowling piece had 2 yards thickness and 15 yards length, but the Indians have assured me there are animals of this kind here, 3 or 4 yards in diameter and 30 to 40 long. They swallow entire hogs, stags, tigers, men with the greatest facility. Now, I think the good father here is confusing diameter with circumference, or else his snakes were incredibly stout. Alternatively, he may have shot one that ate a large prey item. And of course, snakes, as well as not having stupefying breath, they don't suck things in. They strike and bite with the back pointing teeth to grapple on, and then whip the coils around and use constriction. But this account of stupefying breath is a stubborn myth. The tiger referred to is actually the jaguar. There are no true tigers in South America, but a lot of the early Europeans who went over there used terms from the old world, and they would use tiger when they meant jaguar. And even today in Central America, howler monkeys are called baboons, and jaguars tigers. Another large specimen was encountered in Colombia by a team of prospecting geologists led by Roberto Lamon. The men shot and measured a snake at 37 feet 6 inches. The group left the creature to eat their lunch. I don't mean the creature ate their lunch. They left the body of the creature while they went off to eat their lunch, intending to come back and photograph their trophy and skin it. But on their return, they were amazed to find it had gone. The bullets had merely stunned the animal, which had recovered and absconded during their absence. Federico Medam, a Colombian herpetologist, saw an anaconda he estimated to be between 34 and 40 feet, and obtained reports of another being 34 feet long. General Candido Mario de Silva Ronodon. What a name! What a long name. Imagine the size of his name badge if he worked in an office or something. Who lent his name to Rondônia, an area of Brazil, saw a specimen killed by Indians that was some 38 feet long. There are several records of snakes in this size bracket that cannot easily be dismissed, as they've come from reputable scientists. A 34-foot anaconda was shot by Vincent Roth, the director of the National Museum in British Guiana. Mr. R. Mole, a naturalist who made many important contributions to the knowledge of wildlife in Trinidad, reported a 33-foot example in Trinidad in 1924, and Dr. F. Mendem of Columbia University saw a 33-foot 8-inch snake killed on the Wavier River. So then we have Percy Fawcett's story, which I've already pretty much rejected, but you can't throw out the anaconda with the river water, because a lot of these other reports were made by quite creditable witnesses. In 1912, Algot Lange, an explorer from New York, claimed to have shot an anaconda 56 feet long on the Javare River, and his account describes the measuring of the dead snake. It was a most astonishing sight, that great snake lying there at full length, while around it gathered 6 Amazonian Indians and one solitary New Yorker, here in the woods about as far from civilization as it can possibly get. I proceeded to take measurements and used the span between my thumb and little fingertips as a unit, knowing this was exactly 8 inches. Beginning at the mouth of the snake, I continued to the end and found that this unit was contained 84 times. Thus, 84 divided by 8 by 12 gives exactly 56 feet in total length. In circumference, the unit was contained 8 times, a fraction around the thickest part of the body. From this, I derived a diameter of 2 feet 1 inch. These measurements were a result of very careful work, I went on the trail. I went from the tail to the nose again, as to eliminate any error, and then asked the men also to make careful measurements in their own manner, which confirmed the figures given above. The Marquis de Warravan was another explorer of South America and active in the years before the Second World War. He told the great Belgian cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans that he had seen anacondas over 30 feet long, and the natives have told him of far larger ones. He once shot a 26-foot individual that had been coiled around a branch, and when he expressed his desire to retrieve the cadaver, his canoemen told him it was a waste of powder to shoot such a small snake and a waste of time on picking it up. They went on to say, on the Rio Guavare during floods, chiefly in certain lagoons in the neighbourhood and even near the confluence of this stream, we often see snakes that are more than double the size of the one that you have just shot, and often thicker than our canoe. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. F.W. Updegraff, an American explorer of 7 years experience. If you read his book Headhunters in the Amazon, it's an absolute nightmare. He spent basically 7 years living like a savage in the Amazon. He went down there to try and do rubber tapping and other businesses, and ended up living like a wild man with one other fellow deep in the jungle, and he didn't get back to civilization for 7 whole years. He spotted a giant anaconda as it lay in shallow water under his canoe, and he said, "It measured 50 feet for certain, and probably nearer 60. I know this from the position in which it lay. Our canoe was a 24-footer. The snake's head was 10 to 12 feet beyond the bow, and its tail a good 4 feet beyond the stern. Its body was looped into a huge S whose length was the length of our dugout and whose breadth was a good 5 feet. When witnesses are examined face to face by a renowned zoologist, we have to give them a little credence. And one of the witnesses in the next case was interviewed over several days by no less an authority than Bernard Heuvelmans himself. It was in 1947, when many wild and sometimes fierce tribes were still commonplace in South America, a particularly warlike group, the Cervantes, who had recently killed a number of Brazilian officials. Francisco Moreles of the Service for the Protection of Indians organised an expedition to try and establish peaceful relationships with this tribe. The 5-month endeavour included a 20-man lineup, including Serge Boncasse, a French painter whom Heuvelmans later interviewed. By the 2nd month, the company had reached a large island between the 2 branches of the Araguaia River and made base camp there. The men spent several days in preparation for the big push into the wilderness, or the Green Hell as it was known. They spent long reconnaissance hunting trips away from the island, and on one such trip, 8 of them were hunting capybaras, the giant South American roads, in a swamp between Rio Manso, charmingly known as Rio des Mortes, the River of Death, because the Cervantes butchered anyone who dared to cross it, and the Rio Cristianalo. The Cervantes didn't put in an appearance, but the group found something far more frightening. The guide pointed out an anaconda on a rise in the ground, half hidden among the grass. We approached to within 20 metres of it and fired our rifles several times. It tried to make off, all in convolutions, but we caught up with it after 20 or 30 metres and finished it off. Only then did we realise how enormous it was. When we walked along the whole length of its body, it seemed as if it would never end. What struck me most was its enormous head. As we had no measuring implements, one of us took a piece of string and we held it between the ends of the fingers on one hand and the shoulder to mark off the length of 1 metre. Actually, it could have been a little less. We measured the snake several times with this piece and it came to 24 or 25 times as long as the spring. The reptile must therefore have been nearly 23 metres long. Unfortunately, none of the men were zoologists and none of them realised the importance of this find, because Bonacase himself had heard so many stories of giant anacondas, he believed them to be commonplace. The carcass and even the skin would have weighed the men down too much for them to have brought it back. So sadly, this invaluable specimen was left to the jungle scavengers. So if we can have the next photograph, that's the river of death that it occurred near. That's a snap of this wonderfully named river of death. In the late 1950s, there was a dramatic encounter with an anaconda. Pardon me. The political climate, with its resurgence of communism in Latin America, was such that the US government placed CIA agents in sensitive areas. One agent called Lee was told by cattle ranchers of a giant snake lairing in a cave in Bolivia. The reptile was supposed to be over 33 feet long and was said to have eaten 10 Indians and as many cattle over the years. Every 3 months or so, the serpent emerged, dragged a cow into the river, killed it and ate it, and then would return to its cave. The rancher wanted Lee to capture the animal and take it to a zoo, as it was probably the largest snake in the world, or so he thought. The problem was discussed by the embassy many times until someone came up with an audacious plot to catch it. The plan was to flush the monster out from its lair with tear gas, whilst a long sack, complete with zip fasteners, was held over the mouth of the cave. There would be 2 zip men, one at each end of the sack, to hasten the operation. For security, Lee carried, ironically, a .357 Python pistol. It was just as well that Lee had his gun, as things went spectacularly wrong. The tear gas was shot into the cave, and the anaconda, thrashing madly, shot out of the cave and into the sack. Once its entire length was inside, both ends were zipped up, but the agents had not reckoned with the snake's vast strength, however. Its violent writhing split the sack end to end, and the brute was free. The livid animal came rushing at Lee, who whipped out his pistol and managed to put a bullet in its head. The snake threw itself into a huge loop, smashing into a hardwood tree about as big as a telephone pole. The tree shattered like matchwood, and the snake fell back into the jungle. Lee pumped another 2 bullets into its head, and when it finally expired, they measured its length as 34 feet 3 inches. Lee skinned the snake and took the hide back to the United States, where he kept it in his garage. Its current whereabouts are unknown. So that is another one of these strange tales where there might just be something to prove it. Somewhere there might be a forgotten coil of huge snake skin in somebody's garage or attic that the owner has long since passed away, and nobody knows what it is, where it came from, or just how important it is. These things happen from time to time. In Marseille in 1986, an expert in geckos was walking through the Natural History Museum when he looked at a display case and nearly fainted in amazement, because there was a giant stuffed gecko in there, far larger than anything known to science, and it was identified as something completely new, and no one knew where it came from. They'd lost all the notes that went with it, and it was a specimen from the 19th century, and it was obviously brought back from some expedition, and they'd forgotten what it was, but just stuck it out on display anyway. And they worked out it probably came from New Zealand or New Caledonia, and it's been named Delcourt's giant gecko. And nobody knows if it's extinct or if it's still knocking around in the wilds of New Caledonia or New Guinea. I mean, there are traditions of large lizards living in the trees in New Guinea. The Maoris talk about it. But that's an example of how these things occasionally turn on. Lee's colleague, David Atlee Phillips, understandably doubted his friend's outlandish story. Sometime later, he was attending a party at Washington and mentioned the saga to Darwin Bell, then Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Labour Affairs. Bell claimed not only to have known Lee, but to have taken part in the capture. "I was the tail zipper man," he told an amazed Phillips. All these stories are a fairly long time ago, but there are some more recent ones. Near Sao Paulo, Brazil, farmer cum hunter Joao Menezes was fishing with his 3-year-old son Daniel when he turned his back on the boy to store some fish in a wooden shack. Suddenly, his son's screams rent the air, and the horrified man turned to see a 45-foot-long anaconda that had risen from the waters and seized his boy by the neck. He tried in vain to pry the jaws of the creature apart and couldn't, so he ran home for his rifle. But by the time he got back, the boy had been constricted and was in the process of being swallowed. And that was in the 90s when that happened, in the mid-90s. And more recently, Colonel John Blashford Snell, and can we have the next picture, please? This is John Blashford Snell. He looks like he's just stepped out of a Boy's Own adventure strip sometime in the 1920s. But John Blashford Snell is a legendary British explorer, and he is connected with the CFZ as well. He's our sort of our totem figure, if you will, along with the Tasmanian wolf, which is our totem beast. Our lifetime honorary president is this wonderful explorer, John Blashford Snell, who's written a number of books about exciting adventures he's had all over the world, from New Guinea to Africa to South America. And he was told an intriguing story while he was traveling across the Andes by river from Bolivia to Buenos, and he says that a 13-meter, a 33-foot anaconda was captured by a farmer after it had eaten a cow. Apparently, he enticed it with a pig on a rope, and it was living now in a pool on his farm. He tried to sell the story unsuccessfully to the press, but this is in northwest Brazil, and it occurred in late 1999. The Colonel also recounted how his friend Tom Cochrane, an agricultural engineer from New Zealand, whilst working in an area north of Santa Cruz in Argentina, was shown by locals an enormous snake found in a swamp near the village. Cochrane used his tape to measure it at 54 feet long, but he had little knowledge of snakes, and it had no idea just how extraordinary this size was. Jerome Jennis of the Amazon Explorer website saw an account emailed to the Extreme Science website claiming the capture of a huge anaconda in Bolivia, which went thus: "Dear sirs, a very unusual sized animal has been found in our country, and we think it might be of interest due to its extraordinary characteristics. It could be a world record. It is a very large anaconda that measures 16 meters, 52.88 feet, has a body width of 2 meters, 6.5 feet, an approximate weight of 4 tons. It had to be pulled into captivity by 14 oxes. R. Sanchez. Jennings emailed Sanchez offering to fly out to Bolivia to confirm the measurement, but he never got a reply. Whilst taking part in the Scientific Exploration Society's Cotamama 4 expedition, Jennings met Johnny, a soldier from the Bolivian Special Forces secondment. He told Jennings the following story: "I was working as a driver to a captain, and I had taken him to a meeting at a base near River Alta. Very dangerous jungle, very wild, and we had to wait for him. I knew that I had to hide if I did not want any more work, so I climbed a tree at the edge of the camp and tried to relax. The tree was very big and I could see over the jungle to a pool. The ground had been cleared to one side and the people who lived there had cows. A small cow, a baby cow, a calf, went to take a drink at the edge of the water when a big anaconda came out of the water and takes the calf by the face and drags it into the pool. I nearly fell out of the tree when I saw this. When my captain had finished his meeting, I told him, and he ran off to his office and grabbed a rifle. We went to the pool and shot the anaconda. The captain took the skin and put it on his house. It goes around the wall 2 times. Jennings asked Johnny if the snake had been measured. We did not measure it, but it was more than 10 meters, 33 feet. I know this because I saw another big snake outside the camp that was not as big as the one we shot. The other snake went over the road and went past a low wall. It was night and I was in my Jeep and I saw
control of this tactical exchange, and then
I was too frightened to get out, so I let it go. When it had gone, I measured the wall. The wall was 10 meters. The snake had its head past the wall as it went. The snake in the pool was much bigger. Even 45 to 66 footers seem like runts in comparison to some monsters. There is a school of thought that there are 2 separate giant constrictors in the neotropics, the giant anaconda and the markedly different and far larger Sakuraju gigante or giant boa. Now, this is a creature that is supposed to reach Toho Studio style dimensions. The Marquis de Warravan, who we mentioned earlier, was told of such behemoths by his canoe men, who seemed to think them different to anacondas. Once on the Rio Uvar, when it was in flood, some Payapoco Indians tried to take a shortcut to the Rio Guavare via some marshes and lagoons. Having just crossed a small lake, the Indians heard a sound akin to thunder behind them. And even though the rains had ceased and the skies were clear, looking back, they saw the waters in turmoil and a massive animal thrashing about in mid-water. A gigantic snake's head broke the surface as the animal disported itself before diving again. The Indians believed that the monster surfaced that had the monster surface whilst they were crossing, they would have been devoured. Not unreasonably, they vowed never to take that particular shortcut again. The Marquis himself only narrowly missed seeing the Sakuraju gigante. He reached the Rio Putumayo on the day after the giant boa had dragged off an ox, and the people were still in a state of shock. And he writes of these giants. Around the upper Paraguay, they give the name Minakeo to a more or less fabulous snake. The natives say it can reach the size of a canoe. They suppose it to be a Sakuraju or giant boa constrictor that has grown very old and turned into a water snake. On the upper Rio Parna in Brazilian territory, I've also been told of enormous snakes capable of dragging a canoe to the bottom. These monsters frequent deserted places and never leave the river. The fear they arouse is quite superstitious. The idea of a giant serpent growing from a small snake is seen in legends all over the world. And the concept of a snake becomes so large that it can't live on land and has to take an aquatic lifestyle. Echoes the Scandinavian Lindorm story. One man, and can we have the next slide, please? One man who was convinced of the giant boa's existence was Lorenz Hagenbach. The Hagenbachs were a dynasty of animal collectors who had supplied zoos worldwide with animals for over a century. This is in the days when captive breeding programs were only a twinkle in zoo curators' eyes, and the animals they displayed in zoos were almost all wild caught. The Hagenbacks provided rare and exotic beasts from all over the globe. It was one of the Hagenbacks explorers who first discovered the pygmy hippopotamus in Liberia on the 28th of February 1913. And Lawrence himself discovered the skin of the Andean wolf in a Buenos Aires market in 1927. As far as we know, no Westerner has ever seen this animal alive, and only one skull from this rare animal has ever fallen into the hands of zoologists. The Hagenbeck family papers include several reports and transcripts pertaining to the mother of all snakes. Two of Hagenbeck's confidants were Roman Catholic priests, Father Victor Heintz and Father Protenius Finkel. Father Heintz was lucky enough to see the giant boa on more than one occasion. And this is what he writes. During the great floods of 1922, on May the 22nd, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon to be exact, I was being taken home by canoe on the Amazon from Obidos when I suddenly noticed something surprising in midstream. I distinctly recognized a giant water snake at a distance of some 30 yards. Trying to distinguish it from the Sakuraju, the natives who accompanied me named the reptile because of its enormous size, Sakuraju gigante, giant boa. Coiled up in two rings, the monster drifted quietly and gently downstream. My quaking crew had stopped paddling. Thunderstruck, we all stared at the frightful beast. We reckoned that its body was as thick as an oil drum, and the visible length was some 80 feet. We were far enough away, and when we were far enough away, my boatmen dared speak again, and they said the monster would have clustered like a box of matches had it not previously consumed several large capybaras. Spurred on by the dramatic encounter, the priest began to study the phenomenon seriously. He discovered another specimen had been killed a day's march from Obidios, and that it was in the act of swallowing a capybara at the time. This particular snake had been on the shore of the Lago Grande do Sela, and its stomach contained 4 other adult capybaras. Elsewhere, 2 huge round scats were discovered that were attributed to the giant boa. One had an oxen's hoof bone protruding from it. The snake itself was far from finished with Father Heintz. He writes again, my second encounter with a giant snake took place on the 29th of October 1929. To escape the heat, I had decided to go downriver at about 7 p.m. in the direction of Anaconda. At about midnight, we found ourselves above the mouth of the Piaba, when my crew, seized with a sudden fear, began to row hard towards the shore. What is it? I cried, sitting up. There is a big animal, they muttered, very excited. At the same moment, I heard the water move as if a steamboat had passed by. Immediately, several meters above the surface of the water, 2 bluish green lights, like navigation lights on the bridge of a riverboat, appeared. And they shouted, look out, it's a steamer. Row to the side so he doesn't upset us. Un Cobra Grande, they said. Petrified, we all watched as the monster approached. It avoided us and recrossed the river in less than a minute, a crossing that would have taken us 10 to 15 times as long. On the safety of dry land, we took courage and shouted to it to attract the attention of the great snake. It was at this very moment a human figure began to wave an oil lamp on the other side of the shore, thinking no doubt that someone was in danger. Almost at once, the snake rose to the surface and when we were able to appreciate clearly the difference between the light of the lamp and the phosphorus light in the monster's eyes. Later, on my return to the place, they assured me that above the mouth of the Piaba had dwelt a Sakuraju gigante. This account is interesting from a zoological point of view because it contains a detail unknown to Father Heintz. The priest and his friends tried to attract the snake by shouting to no avail. However, the animal responded to light stimulus. This is because snakes are functionally deaf. They can pick up vibrations through the lower jawbone if it's in connection with the ground, but they don't have functioning ears. Father Heinz and co were clearly unaware of this. This lends some weight to the report. As far as I know, it's not been commented on before. Heinz began to interview other witnesses, and one of these was Raimundo Zimmer, a Portuguese merchant who had lived for 9 years opposite the town of Faro on the Rio Jamunda. On the 6th of July 1930, I was going up the Jamunda and the company of my wife and a boy who looks after my motorboat. Night was falling and we saw a light on the riverbank. In the belief that it was the house I was looking for, I steered towards the light and switched on my searchlight. But then I noticed that the light was charging towards us at an incredible speed. A huge wave lifted up the bow of the boat and made us almost capsize. My wife screamed in terror and at the same moment made out the shape of a giant snake rearing out of the water and performing a St. Vitus dance around the boat. After the monster crossed the tributary of the Amazon, about half a kilometre wide, at a fabulous speed, leaving a huge wake larger than any of the steamboats at full speed. The waves hit our 13-metre boat with such force that at every moment we were in danger of capsizing. I opened the motor flat out and made for dry land. Owing to the understandable excitement at the time, it was not possible for me to reckon the monster's length, but I presume as a result of a wound, the animal lost one eye since we only saw one light. I think the giant snake must have mistaken our searchlight for the eye of one of his fellow snakes. That's interesting. Two cases of these monstrous snakes with bioluminescent eyes, which the anaconda doesn't have. This is, if it exists, seems to be something very different. In the same area in 1948, an old pupil of Father Heinz, Paul Travallo, had a sighting of his own. He observed from a distance of 900 feet a gigantic snake emerge from the water. Travallo estimated it to be fully 50 meters, 167 feet long. This mammoth serpent followed his boat for a moment, and needless to say, Travallo made off at top speed. Father Frinkle was brave or foolish enough to approach one of these titans on land. Whilst on an expedition to the upper reaches of the Rio Trombitas, he saw the head of a giant boa in the water by a bank. The foolhardy father approached to within 6 paces of it and noticed that the eyes were as large as dinner plates. The other difference this is another difference with a true anaconda, whose eyes are comparatively small and beady. As a one-time zookeeper specialising in reptiles, I can vouch for the astounding strength of constricting snakes. Once a young Indian python, no more than 3 feet long, lifted the perspex lid off its tank and escaped for several days, and the lid had been weighted down by several large rocks, but these proved no obstacle to the snake. So you can imagine the titanic strength wielded by a Satyuri gigante, if the reports are to believe, that can exceed 150 feet in length. Father Heinz had a story related to him demonstrating just how powerful the giant boa is. On the 27th of September 1930, on the arm of water that leads from Lake Maricana to Rio Uruguay, a Brazilian named J.O. Pana was engaged in clearing the bank to make it easier for turtles to come up and lay their eggs. At a certain moment, behind one of these floating barriers made of plants and tree trunks and tangled branches, against which steamers of 500 tons often have to battle and force passage, he saw 2 green lights. Pana at first thought they were some fishermen who were looking for eggs, but the whole barrier shook for 100 meters. He then retreated hurriedly from a foaming wave 2 meters high that struck the bank. He then called his 2 sons, and the 3 of them saw a snake rising out of the water, pushing the barrier in front of it for a distance of some 300 meters. until the narrow arm of the water was finally freed of it. During the time they could observe at leisure the phosphorant eyes and the huge teeth of its lower jaw. 3 photographs exist, apparently showing specimens of giant boas killed in 1933, 1948 and 1949. The first 2 were published in the Rio de Janeiro newspapers. All of them had been developed by the same man, Miguel Gastano, the proprietor of a bazaar at Manaus. Father Heinz interviewed him and was assured that none of the photos had been tampered with. The first had been brought in by the Brazilian company Boundary Commission, who said that a snake had been killed on the banks of the Rio Negro. The 30-meter, 100-foot creature had been machine gunned, and in its death throes reared up 9 meters, 30 feet, crushing bushes and small trees with its vast bulk. 4 men had been unable to lift its head. The second was captured alive while swallowing a steer, the bull's horn still protruding from the snake's mouth. A rope was affixed to its neck and it was towed into Manus, where it was finally killed by machine gun fire. Now, snakes, when they're swallowing their prey, big constricting snakes often go into a sort of a trance, which would explain why it would be so passive while swallowing prey. It was alleged to be 40 meters, 131 feet long, and weigh 5 tons. Tim Dinsdale, the late monster hunter and world-renowned cryptozoologist, examined a photo published in the Diário de Paracambu on January 24, 1948. He said, "The first thing that struck me about the photograph is that although the beast appeared to have an enormous blunt snout, the head of the great snake was altogether different from an anaconda, boa constrictor, or python. For one thing, it had eyes that were much too large and a great bang of a mouth and mottled white markings, which were unlike those of an anaconda, which with old age sometimes develops jowls beneath the lower jaw. Another thing, if in the photograph the 6th convolution of the body is at its visible greatest, whereas the largest known snakes, the reticulated python, the skeletal structure is clearly greatest at the 4th convolution." Can we have the next photograph, please? Oh yes, there we go. That's the alleged photograph. Now, to me, that looks like forced perspective. The people are clearly in the background. They're not standing next to the snake. It does look like a big snake because only the big ones develop these jowls underneath the jaw. So it does look like a large snake, but how large, we can't tell. The second photograph was taken after a dramatic encounter in the ruins of Fort Tabitanga on the Rio Hawaii Park in Wapoti territory. The 35-meter, 117-foot snake crawled ashore and made its lair in the fort like some medieval dragon. It took an amazing 500 rounds of machine gun fire to kill it. Apparently, it attacked some soldiers and they defended themselves with the machine guns. The Titanic cadaver was photographed as it floated down the river. We've got the picture, I think. The next picture, please. Oh, no, not, we've gone too far there. Back, what is back? Maybe back before that. No, I think we were missing one somewhere. Hang on. Oh, one appears to have gone astray. That's technology for you. That's why I don't like.
Sorry about that. I thought I got them all in order, but obviously not.
Ah.
I'll see if I can find it and add it in.
Anyway. In the picture, we can see a body of a large snake floating belly up in the water with a mottled patination on the belly. The far bank is visible with buildings on it, but without knowing the width of the river and how far the body is from the bank, we can't estimate the size. The extremities are below the water and the body seems to be distended with gas. Dinsdale saw a colour copy of this. I've only seen black and white, and he said that the belly was a mottled white, a description that doesn't fit the anaconda. The naturalist Peter Matherstein was told by Fausto Lopez, a hotelier from Pucallapa in Peru, that in the 1950s he'd seen an anaconda 30 meters long that had been killed by Indians on the Huagala River. Quite how they would kill an animal that big with spears and bow and arrows, I don't know. I wouldn't fancy tackling one with machine guns. So far, all the sightings of the giant boa have been in South America, but there is one report that suggests its range might go further north. Frances Poli, a French explorer who studied shark fishing in Lake Nicaragua, wrote in his book Sharks Are Caught at Night of an encounter between a German called Breckennecker and a gigantic boa on the borderlands of Nicaragua and Honduras. I was driving along in a jeep along a sort of natural track winding between two lines of trees, when I saw about 50 yards ahead a huge fallen tree trunk which barred the way. I told the boy who I was with to go and find some way of shifting it. He came back at a run. It wasn't a tree trunk at all, but a snake. It stirred and began moving slowly towards us. I've seen the most incredible snakes in this country during the past 20 years, and I can assure you I know how to handle a gun. But on that day I left the revolver where it was. I just stepped on the gas and drove off. Jeremy Wade, the angler extraordinaire and TV naturalist, interviewed several Amazonian fishermen whilst he was exploring the area in 1995. His first informant was Dorival Sabino, who saw a giant boa on the Rio Negro, seemingly the place for them. It was a gigantic animal, like a monster, a snake, but the size was much bigger than normal. The difference was that its head was like some sort of dinosaur with, I don't know whether they were teeth or horns. It was just grotesque. Sabino put its length at some 20 meters, 65 feet, and its width at 3 feet. The horns are problematical. The only horn-bearing snakes are vipers, such as the rhinoceros viper and the horned viper, and the horns are actually modified scales that stand up from the head. It's been suggested that the horns that have been reported on giant snakes several times are in fact the horns of bulls the snakes have been swallowing, protruding from the corners of the mouth. Although snakes usually swallow their prey head first, but if the prey has large, sharp horns, then they swallow them from the backside first to avoid any damage from the horns as it goes down the gullet. On a tributary called Rio Purus, Wade met with another witness, Aurelio Vincent de Oliveira. Whilst navigating backwaters one night some 20 years before, Oliveira and a companion came upon what looked like a floating tree in the torchlight. As they passed it, they looked back and the tree had turned 90 degrees to face them, despite there being no current. They doubled back and crossed the 90-meter channel, paddling stealthily up the other side. The tree again turned to face them. This time they got a look at it. Apparently it was no fallen tree. It had heads on its horns like the roots of a tree, and they could see greenish eyes as well. Just when we just left the canoe on the bank and got out of there, they said. Afterwards, people saw movements in the water there again many times. With no wind there would be waves that covered the beach. Again, I think a prosaic explanation can be found for the horns. You will recall Joe Penna's description of the giant boa pushing through a tangled mass of vegetation blocking the river. Could this specimen have done the same, but got tangled up in some of the branches and got them caught on its head? By torchlight, these could have been mistaken for horns. In 1996, Wade returned continuous inquiries. This time he'd travelled an even more remote area. One 76-year-old man described as a boy, he saw a rib cut from a giant snake that had been shot. But was too large to drag ashore. The rib was 3 feet long. The snake was killed by an engineer who had spotted a strange light on the river just before a large wave washed his boat onto the bank. Botanist Grace Fabello de Santos told Wade that in 1995 she saw 2 lights appear in the middle of the river. The lights emanated from a place that earlier in the evening a dragnet had been caught on something very heavy that had escaped, she said. It came right in close to the bank and then disappeared. The lights were like torches, about 30 centimetres apart. I'm not going to say it was the Cobra Grande, another name for the Cobra Gigante, but I remember clearly how blue the lights were, which I thought was very strange. So what are we to make of these claims? Do snakes of 150 feet plus exist? The answer is currently no one knows for sure. Such monsters seem fantastic, but so did the giant squid, the gorilla and the okapi before they fell into the hands of Western science. Now, some of these ones that have been seen in water, maybe the length was exaggerated when they saw the weight behind the creature that was leaving and thought that that was actually part of the length of the animal. But ones that have been seen out on land are much harder to discredit. So we know that the fossil snake Titanoboa grew to about 43 feet long and was about 3 feet thick. So there's a precedent for these Mega-Serpents in South America. And perhaps as well as the giant Anaconda, there's the second largest species, possibly a descendant of Titanoboa, that still lingers in the antediluvian steamy interior of the Amazonas. But now we must turn away from South America to Africa. Can we have the next slide, please? Oh, we've got him. Yes, we've got the fellow here. The largest snake in Africa is the African rock python, which can grow over 24 feet long. Pythons differ from boas and anacondas. They're not closely related. It's a case of convergent evolution where 2 unrelated animals grow to resemble each other, often on other sides of the world, because they inhabit similar ecological niches. The Tasmanian wolf, or thylacine, and the placental wolf are a good example of this. But again, snakes much bigger than this have been reported from the jungles of Africa. One such monster was photographed by the gentleman in the picture here. Well, it's actually photographed by a passenger of his. He was a Belgian military helicopter pilot in the Katanga region of Zaire. His name was Remy van Leyden, and he was a colonel during World War II, a fighter pilot, and he was highly decorated. After the war, during the war, he shot down 6 enemy fighter planes and 44 V-1 flying bombs, and he gained the rank of squadron leader in the RAF. And after the war, he was made deputy chief of the staff of the Minister of Defence in 1954. He was working when this occurrence happened. He was working as a charter pilot in the Katanga region of Zaire in the Congo, and his chopper had crossed a hollow in the jungle, a clearing, and he saw a vast snake emerging from a hole. The huge serpent was dark green in colour and lighter coloured on the inside. And Van Leyden, who was adept at estimating size, put the creature at 50 feet long. He made several passes, allowing his passenger to shoot photographs of the creature as it reared up 10 feet into the air and tried to strike at the helicopter. Van Leyden estimated the head of the snake to be 3 feet long by 2 feet wide and compared it to a gigantic horse. Can we have the next photograph, please? Have you got the photo? Oh, there we are. Yes.
Sorry, it was a glitch at this end.
Yeah. I just want to take a lump hammer constantly to machine. I just want a machine.
I'm not surprised, but anyway, I've got it working now.
Press the button, the machine does what it's supposed to do. That is the photograph there. The snake is in the middle there, and you can see the clearing. And if you have the next one, there's a close-up of it. There's a cropped version of the snake itself. And some people who've examined the larger photograph, the full photograph, say that they can see termite mounds in the photograph, which are mushroom shaped. There's a certain type of termite in Africa that makes these mounds. And when they get to about 6 feet high, they get this mushroom type shape. And measuring them against the snake, that Van Leeder's estimate of 50 feet is accurate. I can't see these termite mounds on this photograph, but I haven't examined the original copy. One remarkable woman who had experience with giant snakes in Africa was Mary Kingsley, niece of the author Charles Kingsley, who wrote The Water Baby. She had led a sheltered life until the age of 30 and suddenly decided she wanted to explore Africa and study its religions and superstitions. In a time where women were meant to stay at home, she explored the then truly wild areas of West and Central Africa, collecting specimens for the British Museum. And she recorded her remarkable adventures in a book, Travels in West Africa. And this is what she says about giant snakes. I'm assured by the missionaries at Calabar there was a python brought into Creek Town in the Reverend Mr. Goldie's time, which extended the whole length of the Creek Town mission house, that extended the whole length of the Creek Town mission house's veranda and to spare. The python must have been over 40 feet. I have not a shadow of doubt that it was. Stay-at-home people will always discredit great measurements, but experienced bushmen do not. And after all, if it amuses them, it amuses the stay-at-homes to do so, they will, by all means, let them. They will have dull lives of it, and it doesn't hurt you for you to know how exceedingly difficult it is to preserve really big things and bring them home, and how half the time they fall into the hands of people who wouldn't bother to preserve them. In a rotting climate like West Africa, the largest python skin I have ever measured was a damaged one, which was 26 feet. Asia, oh look, we have the next photograph. There, that's the African rock python, yeah. Asia too has its tales of giant serpents. In fact, it's here that in Asia, on the island of Celebi, which is now Sulawesi, the official longest, though not bulkiest, the longest snake was captured, a 33-foot reticulated python taken in 1912. Of course, larger specimens have been reported. In the 18th century, Francis Legault claimed to have encountered one 50 feet long on Java. A brute of similar size was reported in the North China Daily News on November 10, 1880. The story tells of a Western hunter, whose name is never revealed, who came across a remote hut in the dense jungle between Budho and Sirangoon on the Malay Peninsula. Upon the roof of the hut was the skin of a gigantic python. Inquiring into its origin, the hut's owner told this story. The Malay was awakened one night by his wife's scream. Investigating, he found to his horror an immense snake that had drawn the poor woman's whole arm into its maw and was in the process of swallowing her. The plucky fellow seized 2 bags and stuffed them into the corner of the reptile's mouth, thus forcing them to open wider. The snake released the woman and turned upon the man, whipping its coils around him. Fortunately for the Malay, his arms were free, He grabbed his parang, which is similar to a machete, and hacked at the vast serpent. The snake unwound and slithered off through an opening beneath the hut. Both man and the hut were covered in blood. Come morning, he followed the python's trail to a patch of plantain palms. In its death throes, the beast had smashed the trees and uprooted them. In the midst of the destruction lay the offending creature, dead. He had been offered $60 by some Chinese who had travelled long distances to buy pieces of the monster's flesh due to its medicinal properties. They also offered him $6 for the skin. This he kept, however, as a trophy of the ordeal. The skin was between 7 and 8 fathoms. That's 50 to 60 feet long. Now, when a snake does bite you, it has these backward pointing teeth, and I've been bitten by pythons several times. If you try and pull away from it, the teeth sink into the flesh deeper. So the thing to do is force the mouth open and force your arm, or whatever it's bitten, back into the animal's mouth, and then it will open it. So there's a story of this Malay stuffing the bags into the animal's mouth sort of rings true. An even more dramatic story is recounted in the Victorian Natural History tome, A Pictorial Museum of Animated Nature. The captain of a country ship, whilst passing the Sundarbans, which are in Bangladesh and northeast India, a series of mangrove swamps, the biggest mangrove swamps in the world, sent a boat into one of the creeks to obtain some fresh fruits, which are cultivated by the few miserable inhabitants of the inhospitable region. Having reached the shore, the crew moored the boat under a bank and left one of their party to take care of her. During their absence, the Lascar, who remained in charge of the boat, overcome by the heat, lay down under the seats and fell asleep. Whilst he was in this happy state of unconsciousness, an enormous boa, they mean python here, boa was applied to pythons back in the Victorian era and further back, before they knew the difference between them, emerged from the jungle, reached the boat, and had already coiled up its huge body around the sleeper and was in the very act of crushing him to death when his companions fortunately returned at this auspicious moment, and attacking the monster severed a portion of its tail, which so disabled it that it no longer retained the power of doing any mischief. The snake was then easily dispatched and found to measure, as stated, 62 feet and some inches in length. And can we have the next photograph, please? That is a reticulated python that's been killed by some natives in Indonesia. So you get a look at the size of this. Even if these guys are rather short, even if they're 5 feet long, that's going to be 25 to 30 feet, and bigger if they're over 5 feet. So that gives you a idea. Can we have the next one, please? That's another shot of a reticulated python. Australia also has stories of giant snakes. The largest Australian snake is the amethystine or scrub python that reaches about 28 feet. Can we have the next photograph, please? That's an amethystine python. Charles Gould was told by his acquaintance G.R. Moffat that the Aborigines on the lower Murray River between Swan Hill and the Darling Junction knew of a giant black serpent that lived in the Mallee scrub. It was 40 feet long and of a huge girth, but very swift. Fortunately, it produced a vile stench which warned of its approach. A white man, the son of Mr. Peter Beveridge of Swan Hill Station, had seen the beast, and this was around 1857. Mr. Henry Little, a resident of the Darwin River, was told identical stories by stock riders and ration carriers. The Aberdeen monsters were considered to be not uncommon between Wentworth and Coombe Carrier in the 1870s. The mother of all these down under giants was reported back in 1822 by two men in front of a bench of magistrates in Liverpool near Sydney. And then told them that just 4 kilometres outside of town they'd come across a snake 47 feet long and 3 times as thick as a human. Thinking it was dead, one of the pair unwisely threw a rock at it, and to their horror, they found it was very much alive. It rose 5 feet off the ground. Magistrates seemed to believe them, and a posse of armed townfolk ventured off to the location of the encounter, but only found a large crack bearing the impression of its scales. So that is a collection of these stories of giant anacondas and other mega serpents. So they go from ancient times right up to the present day, and we know from a fossil record that such giant snakes did exist. Can we have the next photograph, please? That's a reconstruction of Titanoboa that was unearthed in South America. Its fossils were about 60 million years old, and it was the biggest one they found so far is 43 feet, but they've only found a handful of specimens. So there's no saying that that was the limit to what they could grow. And like the anaconda, they spent most of their time in the water. They were giant boas. And the next one, please. This is the last. And there's a comparison with a human being. So you can see not only how long it is, but how bulky and powerful it is. And they get so bulky because they're buoyed up by the water. They spend most of their time in the water, like the anaconda. Pythons lay eggs. They come onto land to lay eggs, and they lay their eggs in nests on land. But boas and anacondas, the eggs hatch inside the female. She retains the eggs inside her and gives birth to live young, so she never needs to come onto land, so she can stay in the water, getting bigger and bigger. And there's no real size restriction on just how massive they can grow. So nobody knows how long they live for sure. So populations may throw up freak individuals of monstrous size. Obviously, not all the snakes are this size. There might be the only one, in 100,000 that get to these freakish proportions, and we don't know for sure what makes them grow so big. But we know that the two factors that affect size growth in reptiles are quality of food and lack of disturbance. So if they're in very remote areas where they're not disturbed and they're getting plenty of food, these things can eat deer, tapir, jaguars, small caimans, large fish, anything that they like. A fantastically big snake in the size bracket of Titanoboa or even larger is certainly not an impossibility. So, have we got any questions?
Okay, so thank you very much, Richard, and we'll now go through the questions. I think I'm running the questions tonight. So, can you all hear, people? I've just put up the web address for the Centre for Fortean Zoology at the end, as I tend to whenever Richard speaks, and let's just stop sharing. Right, okay, so let's go back up to the beginning. I'm sorry about the sound quality issues we had tonight. I'm not sure what was going on there. I really am not. And a couple of times I struggled to hear, but then I'm very deaf, so yeah. Okay, weird noises coming through. No artifact from the compression, muffled. Okay. So, Richard, we have a question. When these giant anacondas are found, are the remains given to museums?
Well, every time one of the really big ones has been killed, the carcass has been lost because the people that killed it generally didn't know just how valuable it was. They didn't know that scientists had no idea that snakes got this big, because the natives in the jungle and the people who live there take it for granted that these monsters exist. So they didn't know the scientific value of them. The only case where I think they fell into the hands of